Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah Shir. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mir Hashem today we will be learning Daf Mem Dalid Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on the very top of Mem Dalid Amid Aleph. We just have a tiny bit of the Ramah left from Sif Hey, so we're in the midst of Siman Reish Samech Ches Sif Hey at the words of the Ramah, all the way at the top line, Mem Daled Amid Aleph, Ushliach Tzibur. Our learning should be a schos for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanesunim B'Tzaru U'B'Shivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayom U'Bein Bayabasha, Hamakim Yirachem Aleihem, V'Yitziim Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afelu L'Oiro Mishibud L'Geula, Hashta B'Golav Zman Kariv and Amar Amen. Our learning should be a schos Refuah Shalema for Tzvi Ben Leah Miriam, who is in need of Rachemei Shamayim. As I record this shir, I'm actually recording this shir the day before Erev Rosh Hashanah, and it was a day in which Eretz Yisrael experienced a large-scale missile barrage from Iran. Right now, Baruch Hashem, it looks like Vayter Nisim and Neflois, that the Rebbeinu Shalom protected Klal Yisrael. Hinei Lagana v'lo Yishan Shomei Yisrael. When things like this happen, we have to remind ourselves there's a large segment of Klal Yisrael that is trapped in the mindset of Koichi v'oitzim yadi. It's not a taina. I'm not taining on them. They don't know better. They don't know any better. They don't have a background in emunah and betachon. They haven't been exposed to these concepts, and they're stuck in the rut of thinking Koichi v'oitzim yadi. They take a look and they say, wow, take a look at how technologically advanced our defense systems are and how able our people are, etc., etc. But it behooves us, those of us who do have a background in emunah and betachon, those of us who are exposed to Torah, we have to realize, we have to look at it, and we have to give shavach v'hidah to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Hinei lo yanum v'lo yishan shomei Yisrael. I would also mention a famous word that the Rishiva Zatzal Rav Moshe Zechet Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Vracha said on Oz Yashir. In Oz Yashir we say every day, Hashem ish milchama. Hashem is the ish milchama. Hashem is the one who controls milchama. Said Rav Moshe, what that pasuk means is, there is no derech hateva when it comes to milchama. You can't look at war and say, well, al pi derech hateva, they'll win because they're stronger. Al pi derech hateva, they'll win because they have more advanced weaponry. Al pi derech hateva this, al pi derech hateva that. There is no teva when it comes to milchama. When it comes to milchama, Hashem ish milchama. Everything is completely, totally, and only directed by the Rebbeinu Shalom, Hashem ish milchama. So we invite to mispal to the Rebbeinu Shalom, Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, and Nesunim B'Tzaru U'B'Shivya. The Rebbeinu Shalom should protect everyone. Hinei Lagana v'lo Yishan Shomer Yisrael. Says the Ramah, top line here on Mem Dalid Amid Aleph. So in Sif Hey, the Mechaber told us, if somebody makes a mistake and he davens a weekday Shemona Esrei on Shabbos, and he does not mention Shabbos, well, if he completes that Shemona Esrei, he's not Yotze. He davened a Shemona Esrei, but he forgot to mention Shabbos, he's not Yotze his tefillah. He's going to have to daven over again. The halacha of Sif Hey, the Mechaber was discussing what constitutes the completion of Shemona Esrei. When do we say that he has now completed Shemona Esrei, and now he has to daven a new Shemona Esrei? He has to be Chayzer L'Rosh. He has to go all the way back to the beginning of Shemona Esrei and daven the first three brachas of Shemona Esrei over again. He has to daven Avos, Gevuros, Kedushas Hashem. He has to start all over again from the beginning of Shemona Esrei. Said the Mechaber, Akar Raglov, and we discussed at length yesterday, it doesn't really specifically mean Akar Raglov, that he actually stepped out of Shemona Esrei. It means if he really concluded his Shemona Esrei. If his Shemona Esrei typically ends Hamavarech es Amo Yisrael B'Shalom, because he doesn't say Tachanunim, he doesn't say something like a Lekain Tzar after Shemona Esrei. So when he says Hamavarech es Amo Yisrael B'Shalom, his Shemona Esrei is over. He forgot to mention Shabbos, he's got to start again, he's got to daven a new Shemona Esrei. But if his Shemona Esrei is not over yet, then he could be chayzer, he could go back to Shabbos. What does that mean, to go back to Shabbos? Well, let's say he remembers by Moedim. So he'll stop, and now he'll go back, and he'll go back to Atakidashta, or Yismach Moshe. That's where he'll go back to. And he'll go back to Yismach Moshe. He's going to finish the bracha that he was in the middle of, but he's going to go back to Yismach Moshe, and he's going to daven from there on through the end. That's what the Mechaber told us over here in Sifei. Says the Ramah, comments the Ramah, top line, Mem Dalet Amud Aleph. Ushliach tzibur sheshachach shel Shabbos b'shachris. Let's say the fellow who's davening for the Amud goofed. Now this is a pella, because the one who's davening for the Amud goofed, and in his Chazaras Hashatz, he forgot to go ahead and daven a Shabbos Shmoneh Esrei. He davened a weekday Shmoneh Esrei. Ushliach shibas sheshachach shel Shabbos b'shachris ayin Siman Kuf Chavav. You have to take a look at Siman Kuf Chavav, what he has to do. And over there, the Ramah comes out that he is not going to repeat Shmoneh Esrei. The reason he's not going to repeat Shmoneh Esrei is because ultimately he's going to mention Shabbos in the Musaf. It's not like he's going to go a whole day without mentioning Shabbos. He's going to mention Shabbos at Tfilas Musaf. Since he's going to mention Shabbos at Tfilas Musaf, and since if we made him go back, he would be matriach the whole tzibur would have to wait for him. So we're not going to be matriach the tzibur in a case where he's going to end up mentioning Shabbos anyway. Now we move along to Sivav, says the Mechaber. HaTorah b'tefillah Shabbos, v'hechlif shel zu b'zu. If somebody goofs in a tefillah of Shabbos, in one of the Shmoneh Esreis of Shabbos, and he switches one Shabbos Shmoneh Esrei for a different Shabbos Shmoneh Esrei. So he goes to daven Ma'ariv Friday night, and instead of saying Ata Kidashta Yom HaShvi L'Shmecha, he says Yismach Moshe. So he davens the Shacharis Shabbos Shmoneh Esrei instead of the Ma'ariv Shmoneh Esrei, or vice versa. Says the Mechaber, Ein a Chayzer. You don't have to go ahead and repeat the Shmoneh Esrei. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut in your dalet, Ein a Chayzer. Why not? She'ikar bracha revius he ritzei v'menuchasenu. Because let's remember, the Shabbos Shmoneh Esrei is constructed out of 7 brachas. There's the first 3 brachas, Avos, Gvuros, and Kedushas Hashem, that we have in every Shmoneh Esrei. Then there's the last 3 brachas, Avodah, Hodah, and Shalberchas HaShalom. That's the last 3 brachas that are also the same in every Shmoneh Esrei. What's unique to Shabbos? The 7th bracha, the middle bracha. Now Friday night, the middle bracha begins Ata Kidashta. It ends with the paragraph Elokeinu v'Elokei V'seinu Ritzei Navim Nuchasenu, and it closes off Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh Shabbos. That's Friday night. Shabbos morning, it begins Yismach Moshe. And then it ends, Elokeinu v'Elokei V'seinu, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh Shabbos. Mincha, it begins Ata Echad V'Shimcha Echad, and it ends, Elokeinu v'Elokei V'seinu, etc., Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, Iker Bracha Revius, what's the main part of that 4th bracha that's unique to a Shabbos davening? Ritzevim Nuchasenu. It's the paragraph of Elokeinu v'Elokei V'seinu, Ritzevim Nuchasenu, which closes with Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh Shabbos. That's the Iker. That's the main point of the middle bracha of Shmoneh Esrei on Shabbos. V'zen namar b'chol bracha shel Shabbos. And that's the same by all of the Shmoneh Esreis on Shabbos. It's the same by Ma'ariv, by Shachris, and by Mincha. So okay, instead of saying Yismach Moshe, you said Ata Kidashta. Instead of saying Ata Kidashta, you said Ata Echad V'Shimcha Echad. But you said Elokeinu v'Elokei V'seinu, and you closed it off with Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh Shabbos, so you got the Iker, and therefore there's no need to repeat the Shmoneh Esrei. Points out the Mishnah Berurah, V'davka k'shesiyim habracha. But this is only true if you didn't catch your mistake until after you said Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh Shabbos. If you didn't catch your mistake until that point, all right, finish out the Shmoneh Esrei, and you don't have to repeat your Shmoneh Esrei. Avalim nizkar be'emtza bracha. But let's say you went Friday night, you started davening. Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelki kevin amakarosaloi kilil teferes baroishay nasataloi bam doyle fanech bar Sinai. What am I doing? I'm supposed to say Ata Kidashta. Okay, stop and say Ata Kidashta. Correct yourself. If you got all the way to Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh Shabbos, all right, then keep on going, and you don't have to repeat Shmoneh Esrei. Now let's go back into the Shulchan Aruch, second line down. Says the Mechaber, V'yesh oimrim. However, there are those that say, and the Mishnah Berurah, take a look right away in Mishnah Berurah's Katan Tesvav. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'yesh oimrim, ha'achrayim tamu amasha kasa b'lashon v'yesh oimrim. The achrayim react in wonderment to the words of the Mechaber over here, V'yesh oimrim, the kulei alma b'ydim bazeh. What the Mechaber is about to say in the name of a V'yesh oimrim does not seem to be a V'yesh oimrim. It seems to be a davar muskim. Everybody agrees to this. Now let's go back into the Shulchan Aruch. V'yesh oimrim, there are those that say, Shem hechlif shel musif ba'acheres. Let's say what you did was, instead of davening the musaf Shmoneh Esrei, you davened one of the other Shmoneh Esreis. So it's time to daven Musaf. Instead of saying Tikanta Shabbos for Tzitza Karbanei Seha, you went and you said Yisvach Moshe Bemet Nas Chelkai. So you substituted the Musaf davening for the Shachris davening. Now you have a problem. If you substituted, and instead of davening the Musaf Shmoneh Esrei, you davened one of the other Shabbos Shmoneh Esreis, or vice versa, Ayacheres Bishal Musaf. Or if instead of davening the Shachris Shmoneh Esrei, Yisvach Moshe, you went ahead and you davened the Musaf Shmoneh Esrei, Tikanta Shabbos Tzitza Karbanei Seha, then Chayzer. Then you have to repeat Shmoneh Esrei. And the Mishnah Berurah explains this, and it's not hard to understand. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Tezayin, Musaf Ba'acheres. Let's say you went ahead and you were supposed to daven Musaf, and instead of davening Musaf, you davened the Shachris Shmoneh Esrei. So the Mechaber says you have to repeat Shmoneh Esrei. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Va'afilu im ha'acheres gam ke me'inyan ha'Shabbos, even though the Shmoneh Esrei that you davened was a Shabbos Shmoneh Esrei, Kegoin Yisvach Moshe. Instead of davening Musaf to Kanta Shabbos, you daven Chakris, Yisvach Moshe. Says the Chavetz Chaim, even though the Shmoneh Esrei that you daven is a Shabbos Shmoneh Esrei, Ukahai Gavno, or something similar to that, like you daven Dat Kidashta, Kevin Shali Nizkar Ba Me'inyan Karba Musaf Shal Shabbos, you didn't mention the Musaf of Shabbos. What's the whole point of Tikanta Shabbos Ratzitza Karbanei Seha? The point of the Musaf Shmoneh Esrei on Shabbos is that we're going to recite, as part of the davening, as part of the Shmoneh Esrei, we're going to recite the psukim that discuss and describe the Karbanos of Musaf that were brought in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos, right? In Musaf, what do we say? Uv'yom HaShabbos shnei kvasim b'nei shana tamimim. On Shabbos, we bring 2 kvasim b'nei shana tamimim, shnei esrei nesalos milcha b'lav shem v'niska, oila Shabbos b'shabbatai al oila satabid v'niska. We're describing the Karban Musaf that we bring on Shabbos. So it's very nice that when you were supposed to daven Musaf, you daven Yisvach Moshe, and Yisvach Moshe happens to be a Shabbos Shmoneh Esrei. But you missed the point. You didn't discuss the Musaf. So therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah over here, that's why the Mechaber says, if you went ahead and you davened the Shachris Shmoneh Esrei instead of the Musaf Shmoneh Esrei, you missed the boat, and you have to repeat Shmoneh Esrei, even though you mentioned Shabbos. Because he didn't mention the Karban Musaf. The Choshkenim he tefillah acheres legamri. Certainly, let's say you went ahead and you davened the weekday Shmoneh Esrei instead of Musaf. So it's bechlal not a Shabbos Shmoneh Esrei. So of course you have to repeat Shmoneh Esrei. The chiddush over here is, even if you davened a Shabbos Shmoneh Esrei, if you failed to mention Musaf, you missed the point. You got to go ahead and repeat Shmoneh Esrei and say the Musaf Shmoneh Esrei. Therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'dinoi kedaleil. Now the halacha in this case, where instead of davening Musaf, you davened a different Shmoneh Esrei, is the same halacha that we saw previously in Sif Hey. Namely, de'im okar raglov, if you went ahead and you davened the Shachris Shmoneh Esrei by Musaf, you davened Yisvach Moshe. If you went all the way to the end of Shmoneh Esrei and you finished your Shmoneh Esrei, de'im okar raglov, if you stepped out of Shmoneh Esrei, or you concluded your Shmoneh Esrei, chayzel rosh. Okay, so you got to daven a new Shmoneh Esrei. Ve'im loy okar raglov. If you did not conclude your Shmoneh Esrei and you realized your mistake before you concluded Shmoneh Esrei, chayzer l'tikanta Shabbos. You go back to the beginning of the 4th bracha of Shmoneh Esrei. You go back to tikanta Shabbos and you go weiter from there. The Kosav Chai Adam makes an interesting point. The Chai Adam writes, "De'im nizkar achar shesiem habracha ha'imtzois koydem shehischel ritzei." Let's say you were up to the Musaf Shmoneh Esrei and you goofed and you davened the Shachris Shmoneh Esrei. So you davened Yisvach Moshe and you went all the way to Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh HaShabbos. And now after Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh HaShabbos, you realize, oy I just davened Shachris again instead of davening Musaf. What do I do now? Says the Chai Adam, here you don't have to repeat Shmoneh Esrei. What you should do is, right then and there, after Mekadosh HaShabbos, between Mekadosh HaShabbos and Ritzei, you should say, Yoimar, v'nasa lefanecha karban musaf. You should say, like the Mishnah Berurah discussed earlier, the Mishnah Berurah said this earlier in yesterday in Ois Katan Yud Aleph, you should say, Yehi Ratzain shenasa lefanecha karban musaf. It should be your will, Rabbeinu Shalom, that we should be able to bring the karban musaf. And you don't even have to go ahead and say all the psukim of the karban musaf. Just say Yehi Ratzain shenasa lefanecha karban musaf. And now you will be yoitza your Shemona Esrei of Musaf. Now, this is based on an interesting halacha. And that halacha is, if you omit something from a bracha in Shemona Esrei, and you close out the bracha, you say, Baruch Atah Hashem, in our case, B'Kadish HaShabbos. So you omitted the Karban Musaf from the fourth bracha of Shemona Esrei, where you were supposed to mention it. And you actually closed out the bracha. You said, Baruch Atah Hashem B'Kadish HaShabbos. But if you did not yet say Ritzei, you could interject something now, and it's still considered to be part of the fourth bracha of Shemona Esrei. I'll tell you a place where this is very much negeya, halacha l'maisa. Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh, you're supposed to say Ya'aleh v'Yavai in Ritzei. If you don't say Ya'aleh v'Yavai, you have to repeat Shemona Esrei, right? At least in certain cases. Now, if you remember that you forgot Ya'aleh v'Yavai later in Shemona Esrei, if you finished Ritzei, you said v'sachazed ein b'shav chol l'tziyah barachamim baruch atah Hashem ha'machzis shchinas l'tziyin moidem anachnu l'ok shatu Hashem l'keinu v'lekei v'seinu. Now you remember that you didn't say Ya'aleh v'Yavai. What's the halacha? You have to go back to Ritzei. You go back to Ritzei and you properly insert Ya'aleh v'Yavai. But here's an interesting halacha. Let's say you said Ritzei, you forgot Ya'aleh v'Yavai, and you say v'sachazed eineinu b'shav chol l'tziyah barachamim baruch atah Hashem ha'machzis shchinas l'tziyin, and you did not yet say moidim. You could say Ya'aleh v'Yavai right there. You say Ya'aleh v'Yavai, and we consider the Ya'aleh v'Yavai to have been inserted within the bracha of Ritzei, even though you already closed out the bracha. You already said Baruch Atah Hashem ha'machzis shchinas l'tziyin. But since you put in Ya'aleh v'Yavai before you began the next bracha, we consider it to be part and parcel of the previous bracha. That's the halacha that the Chai Adam is saying over here. You were supposed to daven Musaf. In the Musaf Shemona Esrei on Shabbos, you put in the description of the Karban Musaf where? In the fourth bracha. You forgot. Because when you made your fourth bracha, instead of saying Tikkat Shabbos, you said Yispach Moshe. So you didn't mention the Karban Musaf. Now you already closed out the bracha. You already said Baruch Atah Hashem B'Kadish Shabbos. If you remember right then and there that you neglected to say Musaf, you could say Yehiratzayin Shenaseh Karban Musaf. Right? Yehiratzayin, what's the exact nusach? Yehiratzayin Shenaseh Lefanecha Karban Musaf. And now we will consider that to have been part of the fourth bracha, and you're Yoitza Musaf. And now you go weiter. You go weiter, and you don't have to repeat Shemona Esrei. Now, in the Bir Halacha, the Chavetz Chaim points out, what if you didn't remember before you said Ritzei? What if you said Baruch Atah Hashem B'Kadish Shabbos, and now you already said Ritzei? You said Ritzei Hashem L'keinu b'amcha Yisrael v'lisvilasam shei v'hashem v'sa'avodu l'dver beisecha. Now you can't say Yehiratzayin Shenaseh Karban Musaf and consider it to be part of the fourth bracha. But, says the Chai Adam, you could say it as part of Ritzei. And if you say it as part of Ritzei, you also don't have to repeat Shemona Esrei. Ois Kat Yud Zayin. So that the first case that the Mechaber discussed was, instead of saying the tefillah of Musaf, you said one of the other Shemona Esreis instead. Now he's cutting your Zayin or Acheres B'Shal Musaf. Let's say instead of davening Shacharis, you were supposed to say the Yismach Moshe Shemona Esrei, you said Tikkat Shabbos. So somehow you got sedoodled when you were davening, and you davened the Musaf Shemona Esrei instead of the Shacharis Shemona Esrei. Also, the Mechaber said you have to repeat Shemona Esrei. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Acheres B'Shal Musaf, Hainu she'amar hanusach Tikkat Shabbos. You said the Shemona Esrei of Tikkat Shabbos. The kavanasei hoysel l'shem Shacharis. You had in mind to daven Shacharis, but you davened the Musaf Shemona Esrei instead of the Shacharis Shemona Esrei. Av shehiskir b'habracha me'inyan Shabbos. Again, you mentioned Shabbos. Now, over here, this is a little bit harder to understand. You see, in the first case, you were supposed to daven Musaf. You davened the Shacharis Shemona Esrei. Well, you completely missed the boat. This is Musaf. You didn't mention the Karbonos Musaf. It's very easy to understand that you're not Yoitza. But in this case over here, you were supposed to daven Shacharis. Instead of davening Shacharis, you daven Musaf. Okay, what's the big deal? You mentioned Shabbos in the fourth bracha. You said you said Baruch Atah Hashem B'Kadish Shabbos. You even said Tikanta Shabbos Ritzitza Karbonoseh Tzivisa. It all sounds good. So what's the problem? You added in something. You said too much. You talk too much. You mentioned the Karban Musaf. Is that such a big deal? Just because you mentioned the Karban Musaf inappropriately, so now you're not Yotzei and you have to daven another Shmoneh Esrei? Says the Mishnah Berurah, yeah. Hainu she'amar anusach tikanta Shabbos v'kavanasai hoysel l'shem Shachris v'af shehiske ba'bracha b'inyan Shabbos, even though l'chayri you mentioned Shabbos, aval pikein chayzer. You still have to repeat Shmoneh Esrei. Kevin she'amar musaf tait tfilasai, because you talked too much. You mentioned the Karban Musaf inappropriately, and very strong lashon here. V'shikar lifnei hamakayim. You lied in front of the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's not time for Musaf now. Right now you're davening Shachris. Shachris is connected to Tamid Shal Shachar. You're not even allowed to bring the Karban Musaf in the Beis HaMikdash until you bring the Karban Tamid first. You went ahead, you davened your Shachris Shmoneh Esrei, which is connected to Karban Tamid Shal Shachar, and you went ahead and you mentioned the Karban Musaf. You know what that is? Shikar lifnei hamakam. You lied in front of the Rebbeinu Shalom. You said something wholly inappropriate in front of the Rebbeinu Shalom, therefore your Shmoneh Esrei is no good, and you got to daven a new Shachris Shmoneh Esrei. And says the Mishnah Berurah, V'dina gamkein k'daleil. And again, the same halacha as we learned earlier in Sif Hey is going to kick in again. De'im akar raglov. If you davened the wrong Shmoneh Esrei and you concluded your Shmoneh Esrei, chayzel l'roish, you got to go all the way back to the beginning of Shmoneh Esrei, u'mispal tefillah acheres koigen l'shem Shachris, and you have to daven the right Shmoneh Esrei, Yismach Moshe, for Shachris. Aval shemusif lo yispal oid. But very interesting. But now you're not going to daven musaf. Ki kvar yotza b'tefillah harishayna yedei musaf. Because you know what? Even though that first Shmoneh Esrei that you davened, where you davened musaf by mistake, was wholly inappropriate, and we even called it shikar lifnei hamakam, but the bottom line is you davened a Shmoneh Esrei, and you mentioned the Karban Musaf. You were already yotzei the tefillah of musaf, so you're not going to daven musaf again. Avshe kanavana say hoysel l'shal Shachris, even though your kavana was for Shachris. If you realize your mistake before you conclude Shmoneh Esrei, wherever you're up to with Shmoneh Esrei, even if you're one of the in middle of one of the last three brachas of Shmoneh Esrei, you interrupt yourself wherever you're holding, and you go back to the beginning of the fourth bracha to Yismach Moshe for greater detail. Now we go on to Sif Zayin, 3 lines down, beginning of the line, says the Mechaber. In the Friday night Shmoneh Esrei, we say Vayichulu. We say the whole parsha of Vayichulu Shemar V'aretz V'chol Tzavam in the Shtilah Shmoneh Esrei of Friday night. Yet, says the Mechaber, Chayzrim Loimar Vayichulu, we repeat Vayichulu again after Shmoneh Esrei. Why do we do this? Because what do you do if Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos? When Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, you daven a shalish regalim Shmoneh Esrei for Ma'ariv. You put in little mentions of Shabbos, right? You mention Shabbos in the Shmoneh Esrei, but you don't say Vayichulu. So now it turns out that you have a Friday night where you did not say Vayichulu. So then it would be necessary for the tzibur to say Vayichulu after Shmoneh Esrei. So because this could happen, because this does happen, when Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, the Chazal made a flat rule. The rule is that every Friday night we repeat Vayichulu b'tzibur after we complete the Shtilah Shmoneh Esrei. So Chayzrim Loimar Vayichulu Mishum Yom Tov Shechal Yis B'Shabbos She'eino Omer Ma'aseh B'Tefillah. V'gam, and there's another reason why we repeat Vayichulu after the Shtilah Shmoneh Esrei. V'gam Lohoitzi L'mi She'eino Yedea. You might have some people in shul that don't know how to say Vayichulu on their own. By listening to the Vayichulu, you'll be moitzi them. The Omer Ma'aseh B'Kol Ram, and the Vayichulu should be recited out loud, umad, and it should be recited while standing. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kat Yud Ches, She'ein Omer Ma'aseh. When Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, you don't say Vayichulu inside the Shmoneh Esrei. That's why you repeat it. Va'agav Shabbos zeh, and because this happens when Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, tikdu l'chalosh habasais. Chazal made a flat takana. Every Friday night, you repeat Vayichulu after the Shtilah Shmoneh Esrei. Ois cut your test. The Mechaber said that Vayichulu should be said b'kol ram. It should be said out loud, umad, and while standing. Says the Chavetz Chaim. Why? Lefi shebazeh onu mi'idim la'kadosh baruch hu b'maseh bereishis. When we say Vayichulu, we're saying public testimony that the Rebbeinu Shalom created the world. V'din edim ba'amida. Eidos, testimony, is always said while standing, not like what you see in the movies or something in court, where the witness is sitting there very comfortably in the witness box. No, edus is said while standing. So edus, we're saying edus on the Rebbeinu Shalom's Brias HaOlam, we say it's standing. This is based on a pasuk that says that edus has to be ba'amida. And Vayechulu should be said together, biyachad, by the whole tzibur. Because when we say this testimony in front of the Rebbeinu Shalom, when we testify to the Rebbeinu Shalom's creation of the world, we have to do it be'eda shlema, which means with a minyan. An eda, the Gemara learns out, is a minimum of 10 people. Why? This is based on the pasuk v'nikdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, "I will be sanctified amongst the b'nei Yisrael," and we learn out that pasuk is referring to a minyan. So we want to say it the whole tzibur together. But at least you should make sure to say it with 2 people. Why? Because again, it's edus. Edus is 2 people. The Yachid HaMispal, when somebody is davening alone, b'yechidus, yesh oimrim de'ena chayzer loimer v'yachulu, de'en edus l'yachid. Some say that an individual who's davening b'yechidus, there's really no need for him to go ahead and repeat v'yachulu, because he's a yachid, he's all alone, there's no din of edus over here. And he already was yotzeh saying v'yachulu, because he did mention v'yachulu in his own shtil Shmoneh Esrei. But there are those that say no, even somebody davening b'yechidus should repeat vayechulu. Why? It's actually very logical. Because again, why do we repeat vayechulu Friday night? Because of the case when Shabbos falls out on Friday night. When Shabbos falls out on Friday night, you don't say vayechulu in the shtil Shmoneh Esrei, so you got to say it after. Well, that applies to a yachid too. What happens if somebody's davening b'yechidus on a Yom Tov that falls out on Shabbos? He's not going to say vayechulu in his shtil Shmoneh Esrei, so he's going to have to say vayechulu after Shmoneh Esrei. So again, since that's going to happen when Yom Tov falls out on Friday night, so too there's a flat rule that on all Friday nights you repeat vayechulu after Shmoneh Esrei. There's no reason why it shouldn't apply to a yachid. But there's no reason for a yachid to say it while standing, because after all, he's not saying edus, he's not saying it with another person, he doesn't have 2 edim, so it already doesn't have the format of edus. If it doesn't have the format of edus, he doesn't need to say it standing. The Mishnah Berurah is machriya that even when you daven b'yechidus, you should repeat vayechulu. Avalo yiskaven l'shem edus, but you should not have kavana that you're saying edus elikikayreh b'Torah. You should just have in mind that like you're reading psukim in the Torah, because a single person alone cannot say edus. Kasam Mate Moshe. The Mate Moshe writes, if shachach loymar bebeis hakneses, if you did not say vayechulu after the shtil Shmoneh Esrei in shul, Yomer oisei sheve kiddush mu'umad. You should make sure that when you say vayechulu by kiddush, you should be standing, which we do all the time, says the Mishnah Berurah. Our minig, and the Chavetz Chaim brings this down for the Pri Megadim, is that we always say vayechulu in kiddush while standing, even if we did say it in shul. Moving along to Sif Ches, 4 lines down, the middle of the line, says the Mechaber. After the shtil Shmoneh Esrei, we have something that's very rare, a very rare occurrence. Well, it's not a rare occurrence because we do it every Friday night, but we never have a chazaras hashatz by Ma'ariv. Yet Friday night we have a chazaras hashatz by Ma'ariv. What's that chazaras hashatz? It's what's called the bracha me'ein sheva. It's a shortened version of the 7 brachas of the Shabbos Shmoneh Esrei. And we'll get to that in a moment. But this is where the chazan begins after the shtil Shmoneh Esrei Friday night. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu, right? Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, Hakel HaGadol HaGibar V'Adonai Rakel Elyoin, Kainei Shamayim V'Aretz, right before Magen Avos B'Dvaroi. That's the beginning of this shortened, this abridged, if you will, chazaras hashatz that we say Friday night. This is the bracha achas me'ein sheva. So that's what the Mechaber says here. Bracha achas me'ein sheva, but ve'ena yachid omer oisa. But somebody who's davening b'yechidus does not say this bracha achas me'ein sheva. Now, why do we have this? Why do we have this bracha achas be'ein sheva? Why do we have this abridged type of chazaras hashatz by Ma'ariv on Friday night? Explains the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Chaf. Achas me'ein sheva. Hu masha asher tzibah omer achar tefillah baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu kainei shamayim va'aretz. This is the bracha achas me'ein sheva. V'niskena, and this bracha was established mishum sakanas mazikim, because of the sakana posed by mazikim. Now, whether the Chavetz Chaim is referring to the mazikim, the supernatural type of mazikim, or even just bandits, but they established this bracha because of a sakana of mazikim. What was the sakana of mazikim on Friday night? Their batei kniyos were out in the fields. They were not in the middle of the town. They were out in isolated areas. Now, Friday night, there were some people who worked until late Friday, and sometimes people came late to Ma'ariv Friday night. Now, if they came late to Ma'ariv, they might be still davening their Shtil Shmona Esrei when almost everybody else finished. So what could happen? What could happen is you have a straggler who came in late. He's still in the middle of davening Shmona Esrei. Meantime, everybody else finished Ma'ariv, and everybody leaves. And now he's left all alone in the Beis HaKnesses that's out in the middle of the Sadeh. Now he's going to walk home alone, and he might be in danger. So you know what Chazal did? Chazal were misakin the bracha achas me'ein sheva. Chazal were misakin that you should have a little abridged chazaras hashatz by Ma'ariv Friday night. That way, while the chazan is davening this chazaras hashatz, all the stragglers will have a chance to finish Ma'ariv, and now everybody will be able to go home together, and nobody will be alone. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says over here. V'niskena mishum sakanas mazikim shabbat k'neisiyah shalahem hayu basadeh v'lepa'amim b'nei adam makrim lavei lebeis hakneses. Sometimes people would come late to shul Friday night by Ma'ariv v'yisharu yechidim bebeis hakneses basadeh, and they might come to be left alone in the shul that was away out in the sadeh. And then they'll have to walk home alone. Lefikach tiknu brachazu. So to prevent this, Chazal were masakin this bracha, kedei sheba'oid sheshliach tzibur ma'arich ba, so that while the shliach tzibur is taking his time with chazanus, saying the bracha achas me'ein sheva, yisaimu geim heim tfilasam, even the stragglers will have time to finish their ma'ariv, and everybody will go home together. V'gam ho'idna lo zaza takana mimekayma, and even though the rationale for this bracha no longer seems to apply, but still, it was a takana, the takana bimkaimai oimedes. Says the Mechaber weiter. No, actually the Ramah. Says the Ramah 5 lines down the middle of the line. Haga. Miu, im hayachid roitza lahakmar alatzmai. If somebody's davening b'yechidus and he wants to say bracha achas me'ein sheva, yachal la'amra, he could say it, albeit beloy psicha or beloy chasima. He has to say it without the psicha and without the chasima. Now, what's the psicha and what's the chasima, and exactly what is this bracha achas me'ein sheva? So if you take a look in the bracha achas me'ein sheva, if you open up a siddur and you take a look, the way the bracha is constructed is like this. It begins, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu Elokei Avraham Elokei Yitzchak v'Elokei Yaakov hakeil hagadol hagibar v'hanoira keil elyon kainei shamayim v'aretz. That's the psicha. That's the opening of bracha achas me'ein sheva. A yachid cannot say that. That's only said b'tzibur. Then we have the actual text of the bracha achas me'ein sheva itself. This is the part, what I'm going to read now, this is the part that's called a bracha achas, one bracha, me'ein sheva. That is similar to all 7 brachas of the Shabbos Shmona Esrei. Let's see how. Well, what does the text say here? Mogen avos bidvaroi. The Rabbeinu Shalom is the Mogen avos, the shield of the avos, bidvaroi, with his words. Well, that's the bracha of Mogen Avram. That's the first bracha of Shmona Esrei. Mogen avos. So that's one bracha. Mechaye mesim b'ma'amaroi. The Rabbeinu Shalom is the Mechaye mesim. The Rabbeinu Shalom is the one who resuscitates the dead. That's the second bracha of a typical Shmona Esrei, Mechaye mesim. So here have bracha number 2. Then we have Hakeil HaKadosh. Okay, that's bracha number 3 of a regular Shmona Esrei. Baruch atah Hashem Hakeil HaKadosh. Shein kamayu. Hameniach la'amai b'yoim Shabbos kachai kivam ratza lahaniach lahem. Well, we just mentioned Shabbos. That's the 4th bracha of a Shabbos Shmona Esrei. That's the bracha of Kedushas Hayom. So far we have 4 brachas. Lefanav navoid b'yirav afachad. Okay, that's Birchas HaAvodah. That's Ritzei in a regular Shemona Esrei. That's bracha number 5. V'noide l'shmai b'chol yom tamid me'ein habrachos. V'noide l'shmai. We will give thanks to his name. Okay, that's moedim. So that's bracha number 6. Kel hoidois, that's still the bracha of Hoidah. Adoin hashalom, that's Birchas hashalom. That's bracha number 7. So here we have bracha achas me'ein sheva. Now what's the chasima? The chasima is the next paragraph. And it ends Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh HaShabbos. So if a yachid wants to say bracha achas me'ein sheva, he could say it. But he has to say it without the psicha and without the chasima. So he's only going to say the paragraph of Mogein Avos. He's not going to say the first paragraph, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei V'Seinu, that ends Kainei Shemayim V'Aretz, and he's not going to say the last paragraph, Elokeinu v'Elokei V'Seinu, that ends Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadosh HaShabbos. He's only going to say the middle paragraph, Mogein Avos. So that was the Ramah here. The Ramah said that you could say it without the psicha and the chasima, and the Rambam continues, and he says, indeed, v'chein noyagin, our minig is, v'chein noyagin at-tzibur la'amra im shliach tzibur b'loi psicha v'chasima. What do we always do in shul on Friday night? The whole tzibur says the paragraph of Mogen Avos. But we don't say the first paragraph, and we don't say the last paragraph. We say the body of the bracha achas be'en sheva without the psicha and without the chasima. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Chaf Aleph. Ubeloi chasima, dahainu shamaskel Mogen Avos, ad zei kalamasi bereshis bilvad. We only say the middle paragraph. Chav beis beloi psicha v'chasima, and he explains the Mishnah Berurah. Ki ikar takana hayesha shliach tzibur yavarach oisa. The ikar takana of the bracha achas be'en sheva was for the chazan to say the bracha achas be'en sheva to protect the stragglers who came to shul late. Al kain nira pashut shamash noigin be'ezem mekoimos shashliach tzibur oime b'koram rak ad kainei shemayim v'aretz v'achar kach oime b'lachash lo yafe heinoisin. The minig that some shuls had, where the chazan only said the first paragraph loud, and then the rest was just quiet, that's not proper. The whole point is that the chazan should say the whole thing and take his time. Now we go to Sif Test, 3 lines off the bottom, says the Mechaber, Yom Tov shechal liyos b'Shabbos, when Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, Einer maskil shel Yom Tov bebracha achas me'ein sheva. We don't make any insertions into the bracha of bracha achas me'ein sheva in order to mention Yom Tov, if Yom Tov happens to fall out on Shabbos. Pirish, Berkas kel el yon koinei. That's the bracha achas me'ein sheva. Says the Mechaber, just because it happens to be Yom Tov, this bracha achas me'ein sheva is a specific Shabbos bracha. We don't make any insertions into it in order to mention Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Chav Gimel, Eina Maskir, Ki lo tiknua ela b'Shabbos, because the takana of this bracha was made specifically for Shabbos. V'afilu b'Shabbos eina chayva mitzad hadin. And even on Shabbos, really, it's not a chiyuv to say this bracha achas me'en sheva. Rak she tiknua mishum sakana v'chanal. It's only a takana to protect the stragglers. Umad tikun ve'en lo haisef aleh. The takana that was made, that's what we keep, but we're not moisif onto the takana. Now we come to Sif Yud, which is a halacha that a lot of people are aware of, and very often there's a lot of tummeling about this halacha. Should we say Mogen Avos? Should we not say Mogen Avos? A lot of people are aware that there's such a halacha that the bracha achas me'ein sheva is only made in an established minyan. In shul, the chazan says bracha achas me'ein sheva. But you make a minyan in a house Friday night, you don't say bracha achas me'ein sheva. What's behind that halacha, and what's considered an established minyan, what's not considered an established minyan? A lot of tumul rai about this. So here's where it is in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Yud, Ein oimrim bracha achas me'ein sheva. We don't make the bracha achas me'ein sheva bebeis chasanim, in a house where you made a minyan because there's a chasan, va'avelim, or in an oval's house, the lekataima, the ma'achrid lava, shiyud nizoikin. Because again, the whole takana of the bracha achas me'ein sheva was to protect stragglers who came late to shul, and they might get stuck in shul alone, and the shul was out in the sada. That doesn't apply to these type of minyanim. Somebody makes a minyan in his house, nobody's getting stuck alone, having to walk home alone. The purpose of the takana, does not seem to apply, and therefore there is no bracha achas me'ein sheva in such a case. Says the Mishnah Berurah Chavtal Beves Chasan Pirish Kishemispalim bebeisam b'minyan. When you make a minyan in your house, v'choshken oisan shemispalim leprokim b'minyan b'bayis. When you make these temporary minyanim, somebody has an old grandparent that's home who can't walk. So the guy makes phone calls. Erev Shabbos, can we make a minyan in our house? That's a very temporary minyan. It's an unestablished temporary minyan in a house where the takana doesn't apply. Then you don't say bracha achas me'ein sheva. Aval, however, says the Mishnah Berurah, kisheyesh kvius al eze yomim. But if there's a kvius, if this minyan in the house is not, there's an elderly grandparent. No. Everybody knows there's a Friday night minyan in Plony's house. V'yesh sefer Torah etzlam. And, or. There's differences of opinion how to learn this Mishnah Berurah. And there's a sefer Torah. Or maybe, or there's a sefer Torah. Shulchan Aruch HaRav says straight out, you don't need a sefer Torah. V'yesh sefer Torah etzlam, u'kamay b'yeridim. An example that the Mishnah Berurah gives is when all the peddlers or all the merchants go to a market. And now, for a few weeks, they're going to be together for the market. So they make a minyan for the Friday nights for the market. So that's more of an established minyan. And usually they have a sefer Torah with them because they're going to need a minyan Shabbos day also. Then, doimel beis hakneses, that becomes like a beis hakneses kavua, v'oimrim, and then you do say it. Aiskal chafei, the lekataima, says the Mishnah Berurah, very important. Uvemokim shenoyagin la'amra, if you come across one of these kind of minyanim, is it a temporary minyan? Is it not? Is it an established minyan? And they say bracha achas me'ein sheva, ein limchos b'yadam, you should not protest. Kein kasav amagen avram b'shem aradvaz. Aval prima gadim efakvik bazeh devasafik bracha l'matala. Prima gadim takes issue with that because the prima gadim feels we're risking a bracha l'matala. If there's really no need to make the bracha, maybe it's a bracha l'matala. Prima gadim is not so comfortable with it. I dare say that if you have such a situation, if you have a minyan in your home, you should ask your Rav how you should comport yourself. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. Discuss of Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua's refuahs parnasos sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the Bias Gal Tzedek b'meher v'yameinu amen. Be well.